aha, holy shit, I had no idea. I say to my therapist as it hits me that my behavior climbing the corporate ladder to the number 2 in a public auto tech company has been pleasing the man. But why? At 49 years old, I was still in survival mode, reacting to a serious childhood trauma at the hands of the leader of the cult that I grew up in. I'm Art Blanchford, and this is Life in Transition, a podcast about making the most of the changes we're given. As a married father of 3 teenagers, a longtime global business executive and adventurer, I've been through hundreds of transitions in my life. Many have been difficult, but all have led to a depth and richness I could never have imagined. You'll get to hear all about them on this podcast so that together we can create more love and joy in our lives, no matter what transitions we are going through. I was raised in a religious cult until I was 14 years old. The founder, Mark, was God to us and in his own mind. While I think he started it with good intentions, by the time I was born, he had absolute power and control of roughly 40 people living on the commune. With the absolute power and control came absolute corruption and evil. To me, at 5 years old, he was God, controlling everything. He clearly was worshipped by my parents and the other adults in the cult. I was one of the lucky children who got to spend time at his house at the top of the hill. That was the only one that had TV and sweets. I lived at the bottom of the hill with another family, sometimes 2 other families. And there was a third house that also had a family or 2. In total, the cult usually had 6 families, with another few adults that didn't have children. But this day, at his house on top of the hill, everything changed. And I would have no idea how much it would affect my life until I started healing the last few years. I was up at his house and had been for a few days, and hadn't seen my mom during that time. There were lots of kids there and other adults. 2 were my aunts, including my mom's sister, who was currently married to Mark, and many young adults that were Mark's children from his first 2 marriages. There were also several cousins about my age that I enjoyed playing with, but of course I still missed my mom. So I was really excited when Mark called my house and asked my mom to come up. I waited excitedly. Before long, she came crashing through the door, out of breath, and slamming it behind her to keep the blowing snow out. I impulsively ran to her and hugged her leg. Mark came over to her and punched her hard in the stomach. My mom doubled over, and he started pounding her on her back with his fists in a windmill action. He was also screaming that she was evil. She was siding with the devil. He had needed her here right away, and she was slow to get there. I was in shock. The man I thought was God was now beating my mom. She was crying and gasping for breath. I couldn't get my young mind around it. Here was this benevolent God now beating my mother. Still bent over and gasping for breath, Mom explained that her shoes had holes in the soles, so she was trying to find rubber boots before running up the hill to his house in the deep snow. Mark did not care. He kicked her out, saying she was being the devil, still crying and gasping for air. She pulled my arms from around her leg and, still bent over, walked out the front door into the snow. I was left standing alone in the middle of the living room floor, and I started to cry. None of the other kids or adults in the room did anything. They all looked at the floor or at me with haunted and hollow eyes. Mark then started to yell at me, saying, "Now Art is siding with the devil. Everybody send him," which was the equivalent of saying, "Pray for him to get better or to change." That instant, I got it. If you want to survive, shut up and please the man. Now! I did. Realizing that no one there would help me, and viscerally fearing that if I did not stop crying, that I would be the next to be beaten, or maybe killed. So I stopped at once. In some ways, my childhood ended that day, and I have been pleasing people in authority ever since. I pleased my teachers in school, I pleased my parents at home, I pleased my professors in college, and I pleased my bosses at work. I was always one step ahead of what I thought anybody else would want from me. I would answer the questions before they were asked. I would push myself harder than anyone else ever would, just to be safe. This is not all bad, as it served me very well in my career. My bosses could never ask me a question that I didn't already have the answer to. I took on ever-increasing roles of responsibility, and this made me very good at business. But it was not in a healthy way. And I had no idea what was driving me, or that was driving me, until it came out in therapy when I was 49. Taking a step back, I lived in that cult till I was 14, but the leader left when I was 9. There were many good and horrible things about the cult, and I saw a lot of sexual, psychological, and physical abuse. And maybe worst of all, I felt powerless to do anything about it, and felt shame about it. I felt shame about being powerless to do anything about it, even as a young kid. On the good side, I also became very close to my siblings and cousins, and learned how to work really hard, as well as learning all kinds of trades, from building to mechanics and gardening and making cheese and raising and butchering animals. I learned I was capable, which gave me a certain confidence. But just under the surface, I was always feeling anxious and very awkward interacting socially with anyone outside the Temple of Spiritual Learning, the name of the cult. Things got better when Mark left in 1980, just ahead of law enforcement. But there was still tons of dysfunction in my family, as my parents weren't really adults, having relied on Mark to make all the decisions for them since they were kids. And they were not ready to raise 6 children and the 2 cousins that were part of our family and household. My dad was always stressed and frequently lost his temper. I taught him many things, like how to repair cars, even when I was very young. I stepped in when he raged and started physically hitting my older siblings. I ached to just be a kid and have fun with my dad, but those moments were few and far between. It was always stress and struggle and anger and shoulds. I even got in trouble for reading when I should be milking the cows or putting up the hay or cutting the wood. It did make me strong and super close to my siblings and cousins through the shared suffering, but it wasn't much of a childhood. By 1986, the cult was running out of money, so the leader decided to sell the property the cult was on. My dad got a job inspecting fabricated sheet metal in Cookeville, Tennessee at Cookeville Industries. I had never been to Tennessee, but I rode a Greyhound bus there with them. As the only child going with them to find a new home, I was heartbroken to be going to this place so far away and seemed so desolate, but also really excited to finally have the chance of having a home of our own that was no longer part of the cult. I was so happy that we could finally be a normal family. We moved to a nice small house in the very small town of Monterey, Tennessee in 1986, August. 3 of the 8 children didn't move with us, as the 2 oldest girls were already in college, and my older brother wanted to stay and continued to work for the farmer that we had all worked for. He moved in with them. So it was 5 children and 3 adults moving into our home in Tennessee with me and my cousin, who was exactly the same age as me, as the oldest two. We were 14 years old. We enrolled in public school for the first time since fifth grade, and were constantly warned that these people out there in the world were much different than us, and we couldn't behave normally. On top of that, since I had worked ahead in my homeschooling, I started my junior year at 14 years old. These two items made me incredibly awkward socially. I didn't know how to be with outsiders and thought I wasn't okay since I was poor and from a cult, which I wouldn't dare share with anybody. That was my biggest fear. I was very insecure, but I kept pleasing those in authority, connecting with my teachers and bosses and getting good grades and earning some money. My parents didn't have any money to share, so I worked already starting at 6 years old until we left the cult. My parents even taxed me 25% of my earnings since they said I wasn't doing as much around the homestead, so they needed some of that money to help pay for things. In high school, I worked at a convenience store, at Hardee's and at Burger King, making about $3 an hour and often working 40 hours a week, even during school. I went back home in the summers to work farming and construction. The only redeeming social value I had at Monterey High School was that I played football and liked cars and was really good at working on them. I had some dates, but was so awkward that none of them were really relationships. But I kept pleasing those in authority. I kept pleasing the man that meant I could always find work and I always had good grades. And those are good things, even if the motivation for doing so may not have been healthy. A year after moving to Tennessee, I was heartbroken to learn that my parents were still in touch with the cult leader, were still part of the cult. It was still the most important thing in their life. I really needed them at this time as a 15-year-old trying to adjust to life outside the cult and being a senior in high school. But they felt the cult was their purpose and told me so. So going back to see the leader took precedence over their children or their work. Thus, Dad lost his job again, and we had to move to a shell of a house way out in the countryside where we actually had to drive or wade through the Calfkiller River to get to the house. It had no insulation. I still have some scars on my lower back where I took rocks to bed with me that I had heated in the wood stove in order to warm my bed. I wrapped them in towels, but during sleep, the towels came off and my skin blistered. I kept working and kept pleasing the man. It was my only way out. I graduated second in my very small class of 63 people. And at 16 years of age, I started college that fall. I had an angry yelling match with my parents about their loyalty to the cult. As I was leaving, my dad told me to not ever come back. I was on my own at 16. They didn't even want to give me their financial information for my financial aid application. They finally did, but that was the only support I got from them in college. The first year of college was very tough. I was very insecure. My best friend from high school decided not to come with me to college in the last 2 days, so I had a random roommate and felt very alone. When they told me that they were closing the dorms for Christmas, I was shocked, as I had nowhere to live. My parents had moved out of state again to be closer to the cult leader. They had no space for me, and I had to work to have enough money to go back to school in January. But I was good at pleasing the man, so the manager of the restaurant where I worked let me stay in his trailer storage room over Christmas so I could work over break to pay for the next semester. I survived the second semester a little bit better than the first and was planning to go work for my brother back on the farm up north that summer. I was lucky to do my first personal growth workshop that summer as well, and my life started to shift for the better. I started to see that I could influence it. I was still pleasing the man, both my bosses and my professors, and now trying to please my parents again too, so we could have a good relationship. And I came back to school more confident, physically fit, and with some money. Starting engineering school that year was hard work, but I loved it and was good at it, and good at pleasing the professors and getting good grades. I became much less awkward socially and pledged the Sigma Chi fraternity. I still felt much more at home socially if I had a purpose for it, if I oversaw the activity and was not just coming there for fun. I couldn't understand that part. I still struggled with that during high school and college. I was super lucky to have the support of many good families during that time, Murphys, Yoders, Hicks, and other families during those years. They all treated me like their own son and blessed me in many ways, including giving me work and financial support, as well as celebrating my birthdays when no one else did. I'm not sure I could have made it through without them. When I turned 18, James Murphy was the only one that celebrated me, wished me happy birthday, brought me a cake and a card because he said a young man should not be alone on his 18th birthday. After my sophomore year in college, I co-opted at Millikan and again worked very hard, pleasing my boss, and did well there for 16 months. Returning to school, I did better academically and socially, having continued to grow by participating in the Institute for Self-Actualization workshops many times during that 16 months. I was working almost full-time in school, carrying a full load of engineering courses, and active in the fraternity, where my brother said I never slept and believed there was plenty of time to sleep in the grave. I was already a workaholic, trying to be enough, earn my place, and keep pleasing professors, deans, and bosses. And friends. It served my grades well, for sure. I graduated cum laude in December of '93 and was very excited to take a job with TRW VSSI designing seatbelts in Michigan. I married my best friend in April of '94 and put my nose to the grindstone to earn her love and to please my bosses. In 1995, I moved over to Autoliv and was very lucky to start working with my long-term business mentor and friend, Gustav Selsing. It was a European company, and within the first few months, he sent me to Europe to meet all the key managers at all the key sites. This created a great network where I could call for help anytime going forward. Use of this network created an unquantifiable and huge benefit in my career, as in the eyes of the Americans, I could get anything done based on those relationships I had built. And I was always running a medium level of anxiety, thinking I could make a mistake at any time and be fired. So I drove myself very hard. At 26, I started having headaches and seeing black and yellow spots. And finally, I felt a shooting pain in my left arm one Friday night. My wife rushed me to the hospital since she had lost a friend to a heart attack already. They found nothing. With the help of reevaluation counseling, we decided to leave my company and move back to Tennessee. I felt like a failure and was sure that they would fire me as soon as I mentioned quitting. But the president, who later became my mentor, Gustav Selsing, thought I was crazy and asked me to stay a few more months in Michigan. He not only asked me to stay with the company, but said that when I moved back to Tennessee, they would promote me to business unit manager. Which they did, and they hired 3 people to take over the job I was doing alone in Michigan. And that would become a theme for me. I learned a great lesson at that point. When I had decided to quit, I actually became a better employee, since I could make decisions and recommendations boldly, based only on what I thought was best for the company, not worrying about what others thought and how that might affect my career. This lesson stuck with me the rest of my career, as I always strive to have the courageous conversations without regard to how it might affect my personal advancement. The biggest lesson I had at this time was from an engineer working on a project I was managing. When I did my 360 feedback, he told me very clearly in a comment that he felt I cared more about my image than I did about him. This stung, but had truth in it. I was so grateful to Nick for having the courage to tell me the truth. I thanked him and I committed to change. Since then, I've been willing to tell others the truth, even if they didn't want to hear it. I've had a chance to practice that only a few months later when I was giving a performance review to a program manager who worked for me, who was in his late 50s when I was in my mid-20s. He was not doing well, and I had the courage to tell him so with specific data. He was floored and proceeded to show me 15 years of reviews where he had been giving a grade of outstanding. I felt sorry for him. All those bosses didn't have the courage to tell him the truth. They had cared more about their own comfort than helping a colleague grow. After a sleepless night, he accepted what I said only because I had very specific data points, and many of them. But he didn't understand why no one had told him that before. He was willing to grow, and did. This encouraged me to continue with courageous conversations, but I was also still afraid of being fired. We moved to Tennessee, where I was managing the Southern customers: Saturn, Volvo, trucks, BMW, Volkswagen, and Mercedes. I traveled often to Germany and quite liked it there, but my plan was to stay in Tennessee and go into manufacturing. Autoliv was going to close the plant in Indianapolis and open one in Tennessee, and I was helping find the site and planned on managing that site. But a new VP started and decided not to move the plant. I wasn't sure what to do next, so my wife suggested that we take our first real vacation in 5 years of marriage. I went to Hawaii with the intention of figuring out what to do next in my career. I held that question in the background as I ran on the beaches and hiked to the waterfalls. On the way home on the plane, it was very clear: go to Germany. There was an international sales position open for VW that I thought I could do with my left hand, and have time left to learn the language and travel around Europe. I applied for that and didn't get it. But it was now known that I wanted to move to Germany, so I got a call right afterward about being director of the General Motors European business unit. I interviewed with 2 presidents and 1 VP and was offered the job, even though I felt it was over my head. I started taking German lessons and stressed out on how I would show up there in the few months. I knew Germany was a high content and expertise-driven culture. And I did know a lot already, but I was only 29 years old, and most German engineers don't even graduate until they're 27. I would be coming in as a director, as the youngest person on my team. I consulted with my wife about coming in knowing or coming in asking, curious and learning. She said to take the latter approach, to be humble and ask questions and learn. This was another big tipping point in my career. Come in with questions, not answers. Questions like, what is our biggest problem? What's our biggest opportunity? What makes you feel great at work? What makes you feel part of the team? If you were president for a day, what is the first thing that you would do? What do you need to make your job more successful? What is the one thing I can do to make your job easier? It worked. I really started to see the power of true teamwork and servant leadership. There were a few other tipping points in Germany. First was getting clear that my marriage was first. I'd been traveling a lot and had just arrived home late on a Friday from another trip when a customer called and was having big issues at his plant. If we solved it quickly and well, we could win a big new business, and if not, we would not win and likely lose what we had. I called my mentor, and he said, I have been in a situation like that once, and I made the wrong decision, and it cost me a lot of money. Okay, I said. I knew I must go. If I send someone else, we'll lose the business and cost us lots of money. No, he said. I went in a situation just like that, and it cost me my marriage, which cost me personally, not the company, a lot of money. I didn't go and realized for the first time it was okay to say no to business if my marriage was at stake. A team member went and fixed the issue, and we kept the business, and I stayed married. We were starting a family at that time, and I felt I had to choose between being a great businessman or a great father, and was struggling tremendously with that. I went to Tony Robbins' Unleash the Power Within, and realized it didn't have to be either or, but could be both and. I also learned I would need to set boundaries to protect my family relationships. That week, Tanya and I made a list, and the one I remembered is that I would limit my business travel to 8 nights per month on average throughout the year. I still had a lot to learn about boundaries, but that was a good start. Having learned to speak decent German, and my wife not liking Detroit, I thought I would get a job with one of the German OEMs in the South upon my return to the US. But I couldn't land one, so I tried to get a job at Autoliv in Utah, but was told that head office had other plans for me and they couldn't offer me a job in Utah. So on my 31st birthday, I got a call from the president of Autoliv Central Europe, who offered me a group VP job. I didn't want it because of the examples I saw in that role, and I also didn't think I could do it. They sent the VP of HR to convince me, but I still said no. Then came my mentor, and then the CEO, who would be my boss if I took that position. And I explained that I didn't think I was the right person for the job, but he said he was sure that I was, and he needed me to go back to Michigan. I agreed at that point, pleasing the man as well as trusting my mentor, and signed a 2-year contract to be the global vice president of the GM business unit. We moved from Dachau to Detroit in the summer of 2003, with my wife pregnant with our middle son, Sawyer, and our 3-year-old Alex in tow. Life was crazy, and I made it more so in my own head. I was fixing up an old house for our growing family. Being pregnant, my wife couldn't help much because of the paint fumes, and she had to care for Alex. We had no family in the area to help. This was the summer that the grid failure happened in the Midwest, and our apartment was out of power for 10 days or so. I was stepping into a job that felt way too big for me, and I was deathly afraid to fail. I was sure that if I made one mistake, they would figure out I was a fraud and fire me. I was having recurring dreams of being lost or not being able to figure out a new computer program or a massive Excel spreadsheet. Autoliv's relationship with General Motors was a mess, as was our quality and delivery to them, and we were taking them for granted. I was so stressed by all this that I felt I must do something to manage it, or I was going to break down. So I started doing Tony Robbins' 15 minutes to fulfillment each morning. I would walk outdoors and do gratitude and incantations. I didn't realize it then, but this was the restart of my running life. I started jogging 5 minutes in the middle, and then slowly expanding the jogging time. This helped me manage stress, but I was still so focused on pleasing everyone, and I wasn't afraid to work really hard and take on any challenge to please them. I asked GM what they needed and wanted from their best suppliers, and then I set about to do all of those except lower the pricing. I did it so well that we could win most of the business and have superior pricing. Since the issues were in our manufacturing plants, I spent most of the time there, even if my job was primarily sales. I couldn't sell if we didn't deliver perfect quality parts all the time, on time. So I took my show on the road and showed all the leadership and the workers at the plants how we were doing and how much we had at stake, including half of the jobs in our plants if we didn't get it fixed. It worked. It took 1.5 years, but we won our first global GM Supplier of the Year. A year later, GM awarded me the Supplier Executive of the Year award at the Detroit Auto Show in front of thousands of people. I was surprised and asked who had won it before. They said it had never been given before, but was created for me since they had never seen such improvements so fast in a supplier. Wow. Our business growth took off. I collected team members that I had faith in, even if some of them were on the short list to be laid off. We focused on teamwork and started to perform at a very high level. And I was still stressing all the time. When purchasing from GM would call, my heart would literally race. I gave them way too much power. When my boss would call, my heart would race. I always thought it was something bad. I almost missed the birth of my son, talking on the phone to my boss. Things continued to progress well at work. I was asked by GM to join the Supplier Council specifically because of my commitment to courageous conversations, to telling truth to power. I was by far the youngest member on the council. We had a General Motors Tech Day where we presented all of our technologies and capabilities to all the GM executives, including the CEO. I led the whole thing and had many direct interactions with the CEO and his team. The day was a resounding success. My mentor, Gustav Salsing, was in the shadows the whole day just watching. At the end of that very long day, as we were breaking it down, he came up to me and said, "Now you can do what you want." "What?" I asked. He explained, "I wanted you to take this job so that you could see you can stand eye to eye with anyone in the world. You have been doing that all day. You have interacted as an equal with all the top brass at General Motors. You have done what I wanted to show you in this job. So now you can quit, do something else, whatever you want. You have gotten what I wanted you to see." I was humbled and smiled. He said, "Farmer boy," that's what he called me when I started in the company. "Farmer boy has grown up and can handle any room now." I was making good money and the team was strong. I was on a nonprofit board and wanted to spread my wings more and ensure my income, so I decided to get my executive MBA. I had recommendations from executives at General Motors and Autoliv and a big local business owner, and was accepted at the University of Michigan. My boss, the CEO of Autoliv, said it would be good for me to go ahead and learn the language for the work I was already doing. The biggest things I learned were enhanced negotiations, financial language, and how important teamwork is in leadership. I knew that already because I had been using Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team for a few years with great results. But in my MBA, every project team I was on, I required us to do a little team building at the beginning. They all grumbled then, but acknowledged at the end of our performance together that we had performed better because of it. The other great leadership tool I picked up was Kim Cameron's personal management interview, a great one-on-one meeting process to clarify expectations in the beginning and have great two-way feedback ongoing. While getting my MBA, I stepped back a little from the details of my daily work and saw how that also allowed others to grow. I had been holding them back. I loved school and was still stressing all the time. I was deeply anxious, making me unhappy overall. Then the financial crisis hit. I was trotted out by General Motors to support the bailout, which I believed in. I talked with the Wall Street Journal, various radio and TV interviews. I did not agree with how we were handling the downturn inside of my company, and warned of the consequences on our quality and customer relationships. I was overruled by the local president and the new CEO, who was my new boss. So I asked for a new job and was promoted to president of our startup active safety division. It was a great job, and I was still incredibly stressed. trying to please everyone, my boss, the customers, my wife, my kids, even helping my recently divorced and sick dad. And was building a new home and just hating being at work every day. In the summer of 2010, I quit and moved back to Tennessee, where I started a custom steering wheel company. I was happy to be back in Tennessee, spending more time with my family. I worked hard and put almost all of my savings into this company, but I couldn't get it off the ground in a big enough way to support the family. Feeling like my wife would not love me if I couldn't provide, I broke down and was really hard on myself. But it gave me the gift of seeing that she loved me anyway. When I couldn't earn her love at all, she loved me anyway. It was the first time I experienced my inherent worthiness of love, not feeling that I had to earn it. That event sucked at the time, but looking back, it was a true gift. I had opened another chapter in my healing, even if I didn't know how I was going to pay the bills. Desperate at this point, I started doing the Esther Hicks meditation on abundance, which told me to just let go. A few weeks later, I got a call from my former boss at Autoliv, and he asked me whether I considered him a friend. I thought about it because I never had while I'd worked for him, but after I resigned, he had opened up to me about some very personal things. So I did consider him a friend and told him so. He said, "Great, this is one friend asking another for help. Everything you warned us about in North America operations has come to pass, and we need you to fix it." I wasn't ready to give up on my business, which he said was fine as long as I worked for him as a contractor, and that the board of directors was already behind it, and I could do my business on weekends, after giving him 60 hours in 5 days. I would be COO of the operations supporting General Motors. He promised to make me an offer I couldn't refuse. I told him to send the offer and I would check with my investors and my family. I did, and neither party was excited for me to have my energies further divided, but also didn't see much choice to keep the business going or to pay our bills. Then I got the offer, and it was one that would have been hard to refuse. About twice as much as I was making when I left, plus a big performance bonus. It would allow me to keep funding my business that was rapidly running out of cash. I promised my family a trip anywhere they wanted to go in a year when I was done with the contract. And I promised that I would not work on that trip. It was a deal. I entered the most difficult professional time of my life. It was part hell and part awesome. I would work in Michigan or Tijuana or Utah or Matamoros during the week with very long and intense days and very lonely nights. And then I would work in my own business with my kids on the weekends. When I was alone working in Michigan or Mexico, I felt intensely lonely and worthless. My life felt like a black hole. I would go running in the morning and in camp, "I am worthy, I am worthy, I am worthy," over and over again, but I rarely felt it. Even so, we created a good plan to recover Autoliv's business with General Motors. At first, I didn't know what to do and asked my mentor. He said it didn't matter so much what I chose, but to choose something and go forward. It was another key lesson. If you don't know what to do, say, "I know I don't know what to do. But if I did know what to do, what would it be?" That question got me unstuck, and I put together a 4-point plan to fix our design and quality and delivery all at once. I was a mercenary on a mission. We did it in 6 months. The plant managers I was leading said that I pushed so hard that they would have thought I was a complete asshole and not supported me at all, except for the personal management interviews I mentioned earlier. Those really work. With the improvement that we earned, I got the big bonus, well, actually half of it, and reluctantly decided to shut down my steering wheel business. I had unpaid investors, but a little bit of money in the bank again. Autoliv was asking me to come back full-time, and I didn't see another way to recover financially, so I agreed. I turned down the president of North America, as it felt like I would get stuck in Detroit forever. When they offered me president of China, I flew over there with my wife and my oldest son, and we decided we could live there, and the job was great. We left on New Year's Eve, 2011. It was a great job, and I realized that I had become an expert in manufacturing with the curiosity I held during the time I was fixing the operations in North America. In China, I focused on building the team and growing all of us into better human beings together. I love working with people and aligning our values and goals and seeing what we can create. This was my best experience of that. There's so many great memories and stories. Running Autoliv Greater China was a very hard and great joy at the same time. One of our core values became we do hard things, and we did. We built over 60 buildings, hired around 3,000 people, opened 2 huge new campuses, and new plants on 3 other campuses, all the while growing the business, putting in a whole layer of vertical integration, improving quality to the best in the group, and maintaining the best profit in the group. I grew the team, letting some older members in China take a step down without losing face, and even firing a senior VP in such a respectful way that he wanted me to be his coach afterward. During this time, I was also selling off my private business and slowly paying back investors. I took the Erickson coaching training to be a better leader for my team and studied many great books together with them. And we integrated several new companies that we had purchased. It was hard and it was a blast. My favorite thing happened at my going away party. A small Chinese lady hugged my neck and said, "Thank you for saving my life." We were in the life-saving business with our products, but I had never met her before, so I wasn't sure what she was talking about. Reading the shock on my face, she said, "I am your team member's wife, and you have never met me, but our family life is so much better since you became his boss." This resonated with me. He had made great strides in behavior as a human being as we grew the team. It made me smile to the depth of my soul. Using business for good. Sending employees home better than when they came in, not worse. I loved it. I worked a lot and was still pleasing the man. Finally, I was starting to see my value and learning how to stand up for myself in business, even if I wasn't setting all the healthy boundaries yet. I was having fun, making close to $1 million a year, and running a $1.5 billion business with almost 10,000 team members. How far I had come from the call. 2.5 years into my 3-year contract in China, I was looking to extend as the work was just reaching full speed. But my boss wasn't willing to meet my needs for vacation time. So I took that as a sign not to extend and said no. He was floored. A few weeks later, I was so glad that I had not agreed to the extension when my wife said she had hit the wall with living in China and was moving back to the US that month with the kids. I had 6 months left in my contract and would travel, and she could get the kids in school before the beginning of the school year instead of in the middle. Thus started my cycle. 3 weeks in China, half a week in Sweden, and half a week in home in Tennessee every month. This continued until Christmas of 2014 when I moved home. At first, Autoliv had wanted me to move to Europe to be president of the electronics division, which was a great job, but we felt the kids needed to move back to the States and be rooted, especially since 2 of them were adopted, and seeing how much instability was in some of the families in Shanghai. Then they offered me president of North America working out of Utah. Loving the outdoor life there, I agreed and went to find a home there. They retracted it, saying there were others that could run North America, but they needed me to fix the GM business unit that was back in a mess. I was not excited about going back to an old job. But with the same pay I had from China and living at home in Tennessee, I took it. My previous GM lieutenant was already in place, and he did a great job fixing things. I then took on a global business development role, and when I was asked to be sales of the electronics division 2 years later, I did. We spun the company off as Veoneer, which was very exciting, especially ringing the bell on Wall Street. It was heady times in the autonomous driving industry, and I felt on top of the world. I was working hard, thinking I was going to get rich. I was on top and ready to fall, but I didn't know yet, and that will be discussed in the next episode. There are so many ways we could wrap this up, but we will focus on what it takes to build an amazing career. Number 1, teamwork. Love your people and practice authentic leadership. The foundation of this is trust and communication. Build these human relationships with one-on-ones at least once a month, focused on how you're working together, mutual feedback. I call this running the business through the people, not running the people through the business. Send your team members home better than they came to work that day, that month, that year. Second, be curious. This is how you continue to learn and allow you to solve problems. And it also makes it fun. Welcome bad news with curiosity so that you can see and fix the problems. Don't shame people. Don't shoot the messenger. Make decisions as if you don't need the job. This is difficult, but it frees you to do what is truly best for the business and not just your career, which will be best for your career also in the long term. Treat the company like you own it, like it is your money being spent, your reputation, if there is a mistake. Honor customers. Love customers. Everything you have in your life that money can buy comes from customers. All of it. Your food, your kids' college tuition, your home, all of it. For that, they deserve great honor. As Goran Karstadt, an IKEA executive, says, there are only 2 jobs in every company: to serve the customer and to serve someone who serves the customer. Seek advice. Have mentors, coaches, friends, and advisors you can bounce ideas off of and clarify your thinking to come up with the best results. 7, have courageous conversations. Listen. Lean into conflict, not away from it. Respectfully speak the truth, even if it's not what your boss, your team, or your customers want to hear. Long term, it will build trust. Care enough to be honest. Care more about the other person than your own comfort. And finally, 8, set healthy boundaries. Public companies are about more. You are the one that has to set your boundaries for a healthy lifestyle. Hard decisions, easy life. Easy decisions, hard life. So take the time to make the hard decisions about how much you will work and when you won't, how much you will travel, what types of life events have priority, family, health, vacations, rest, fitness, and then stick to those. Then you have your easy life. Or burn out and transition to something else, which will be the necessity if you don't include those boundaries. That transition is now what I am doing after burning out. I know this is a long episode. Thank you for listening. I hope it's been worth your time. I'm so happy to be healed to the level that I can share this now. Just 5 years ago, I was too ashamed to even mention to anyone that I was raised in a cult. My life is in transition. Thank you so much for being a part of it. I can't wait to hear what action you are taking. Connect with me on LinkedIn or our website, lifeintransition.online, and let me know. Let a friend know too. It could be a huge encouragement to them and keep you on the track. Thank you so much for joining me today. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and it would mean a lot to me if you left a review and shared this episode with a friend. If you want to learn more about me and what I do when I'm not podcasting, please visit me at artblanchford.com. Thank you for listening. Together, let's make the most of life in transition.